Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and I had a subscriber ask a question which I'm going to flip in here. And it's an interesting question. It's the sort of question that whole product lines get made trying to answer or address. So I guess we should discuss it for a bit. But he basically wants to know, since when you're sleeping is a good chunk of when your muscle growth happens, how can he prioritize getting enough protein at night? He's worried he might not be getting enough protein in his system when he's sleeping in order to facilitate all that muscle growth. So let me put on my +5 hat of weaponsmithing, do a little bit of crafting, and let's talk about this. All right, guys, this is one of those interesting questions because this is the sort of stuff people worry about, and they've been made to worry about by the whole fitness and supplement industry. But let's be frank here. And it's kind of weird because it's like when you make certain statements about this, people think that you're suddenly anti-protein or that you don't understand the importance of protein in your diet. Look, just because I believe the protein and supplement industry is full of shit with everything that they say, and that people have been advised to eat way more protein than they need, I'm not saying that a high protein diet isn't necessary to gain muscle quickly. Anyone who understands basic biology knows that the human body cannot make essential amino acids. You have to take in those amino acids to make the proteins that your body needs. Obviously, we get most of those from eating proteins that we break down into amino acids. All right, we can't produce that stuff on our own. If we don't get it in our diet, we don't have enough to cover our basic metabolic functions, repair of our body, all of our metabolism, keep our organs working, and sure as hell we can't build muscle without enough protein. All right, nobody's arguing that. No sane, reasonable person is going to argue against that. If you do not consume enough amino acids, generally in the form of protein, in your diet, you're not gaining a single ounce of muscle, period. Not going to happen. What people misunderstand is how much protein is actually involved in the muscle building process. They've been sold a lot of bullshit by the supplement industry. It's simply not true. And look, if you enjoy eating a higher protein diet, that's fine. I don't have a problem with that. I love meat. I love wild game. Eventually, I'd love to go over to eating a diet to where all my meat is stuff that I hunt myself. I absolutely love elk. I love bison, stuff like that. I love steak. So I totally get it that a lot of you enjoy a high protein diet. I don't have a problem with that. My problem is this idea that people think they need these insane amounts of protein to gain muscle. So let's stop and think about what you really need when you sleep. All right, if you're going to gain a pound of muscle every month, and if you're through your noob gains, by the way, if you're through your noob gains, there's no way in hell you're gaining a pound of actual muscle tissue every month, okay? Get that out of your head. But let's go with that anyways. A pound of muscle requires how much protein? Anyone know? Pound of human muscle with fully hydrated muscle, if we were to cut it off you right now and throw it on a scale and weigh out a pound of your muscle and then check the protein content in it, how much is in there? About 110 to 120 grams of protein. Let's push that up to 120, the maximum, right? Pound of human muscle tissue's got 120 grams of protein in it. To gain that every month, you need to consume 120 grams of extra protein to build that. Spread over 30 days. What's 120 divided by 30? 4 grams. You need to consume 4 extra grams of protein. Let's say during your 8 hours of sleep, you're going to build half the muscle that you're going to build for the day. And you need to understand, muscle is metabolically active tissue. Your muscles are growing and shrinking 24 hours a day. Your muscles are growing while you're awake. Your muscles are growing while you're lifting weights. They're just breaking down faster than they're growing while you're lifting weights. You got to remember, they're metabolically active tissue. They have energy in and out all the time. They're growing and shrinking nonstop. All right, most of the tissue in your body is doing that. All right, we're dynamic, metabolically active organisms. We're not viruses. We're not robots. We're all living tissue. So let's say you're going to grow half of that muscle, because that would be disproportionate. Half of that muscle in the 8 hours while you're asleep. What's half of 4 grams? That's 2 grams. Means you need to come up with 2 extra grams of protein floating around in your bloodstream over that 8-hour period. Your body's got to come up with 2 extra grams of protein approximately to build that muscle, to get that pound every month while you're sleeping. Now, what you need to factor in is that, first of all, there's always a little bit of circulating protein. Any meal that you eat with protein in it, yes, most of it hits your bloodstream in the first hour or two, okay? The biggest chunk of it does. So, if you eat a big old steak with 40 grams of protein in it, yeah, probably 20 grams of that has already hit you within the first 2 hours. After that, there's a trickle effect. The rest of it's going to trickle out over several hours, and that trickle can last up to 24 hours. In fact, your body, your liver can store for a little while. It'll store for short periods of time, up to about a day, amino acids that you've eaten that it needs for some sort of vital function. It'll keep certain amino acids, essential amino acids, stuff floating around for a day or so. After that's up, if you don't get more protein in, your body starts scavenging tissues for it, okay? By scavenging tissue, that generally means your muscle tissue. When it needs essential proteins, essential amino acids for stuff, it's going to get them. All right, it's going to increase cortisol. That cortisol is going to release them from your muscle tissue. Now, that being said, if you eat a meal right before bed with 20 grams of protein, let's say you go to bed at 10 o'clock and 8 o'clock you eat a meal with 20 grams of protein in it. Actually, that's really low. Let's say 30 grams of protein, right? All right, by the time you're sleeping, you've already pulled half of that through your bloodstream. It's all spiked and done what you're going to do with it, and there's like about 15 grams of it left to absorb over that next 8 hours. I'm pretty sure that over that next 8 hours while you're sleeping, your body can spare 2 of that 15 grams that it's going to continue to absorb. I'm sure it can spare 2 grams of it to handle your muscle growth. People get these ideas that there's huge amounts of protein involved in the muscle building process. There really isn't, all right? There really isn't. I'm not saying there aren't benefits to higher protein diets, but up to a certain threshold, higher protein is really only useful for gaining muscle when your calories are a little too low. Like if you're trying to recomposition a little bit, and you know that you're not eating enough food to gain weight and you're training really hard, yeah, you probably need a bit more protein because your body's breaking down more protein. All right, it's tapping into more protein for fuel. There's going to be issues with that. A little more protein is probably useful, but if you're eating enough to be gaining weight, you're in a calorie surplus. Even a very small weight gain, I'm talking if you're gaining 1 pound a month, that's weight gain. The odds that you need to be eating 200 or 300 grams of protein to gain muscle sufficiently is just non-existent. It's nonsense. And when you seriously do the math, stop and think about that math. How much protein you probably eat in a day, and you need a lot of it for metabolic functions. I mean, let's be realistic. You probably use 50 as a grown, healthy, athletic male. You probably use 50 to 60 grams of protein every day just for your metabolic functions, for your organs, restructuring tissues, all sorts of stuff, creating hormones. Your body uses it. I mean, if you're a fully grown man who exercises, works out, you're active, you need 50 to 60 grams of protein a day probably just for your basic health. That's not even to gain muscle, okay? That's not even to gain muscle. But if you're up here and you're an active male and you're eating 100 grams of protein a day, and you're burning through 60 every day just to cover all your basic metabolic functions, you're sitting here with like 40 to play around with. All right, if your body can't come up with 4 grams out of that 40 floating around to gain muscle, there's something wrong. And the same thing, you're eating a little bit of protein before bed. I mean, a couple hours before bed, a 30-gram protein meal, there should be a couple of grams of protein left over there floating around to help you gain muscle. Now, for the rest of you who aren't gaining muscle at that sort of rate, it becomes even sillier when you think about it. Some of you guys, where you're at, because you've been training a year or two hard, you're not gaining muscle very fast. You really think your body's going to use 3 or 4 grams of your protein every day to gain muscle? That's how you gain 1 pound of muscle. You're not gaining 1 pound of muscle a month after you've been training for a year and a half anymore, okay? It's not going to happen until you go on drugs. And even then, remember the study we did? We had guys eating 100 grams of protein a day who gained 18 pounds of muscle in 5 months on 100 grams of protein a day. Why? Because every pound of muscle they gained that month only required 4 grams of extra protein beyond all their basic needs every month. They only gained about 3.5 pounds of muscle per month. What's 3.5 times 4? About 14. They needed to come up with 14, 15 extra grams of protein every day to gain that muscle that their body didn't use for something else, didn't get wasted, didn't get burned off, didn't get used to make hormones, to repair an organ, to repair their skin, to grow hair, grow fingernails, all that stuff we use protein for. That's, again, for a healthy active male, it's only about 60 grams. Since these guys ate more than 75 grams of protein, they had no trouble gaining that 18 pounds. Again, guys, worrying about this sort of stuff is not something you need to be worried about. And again, I don't want people to get the impression when I say these things that I'm telling people to eat a low protein diet, or that I'm telling people to try to eat all their protein in 1 or 2 meals a day. I'm not saying that. That's not wise. What I'm saying is the general recommendations for strength athletes trying to gain muscle by most top nutritionists who work with professional athletes is 1 to 1.6 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight. All right, so if you weigh 80 kilos, that's something like 80 to 130 grams of protein. If you're eating 100 grams of protein or more a day, you're probably fine. If you're eating it and spread over at least 3 or 4 meals, you're fine. That is frequent feedings. 3 or 4 meals of protein a day, 30 grams each, all right, that puts you right in that range. If you eat at least 30 grams of protein 3 or 4 times a day, that'll put you right there in that range I just described. You're going to be fine. 30 grams of protein in a meal is sufficient to get full anabolic drive, everything you're looking for. You're getting at least 3 or 4 of those every day, so that's frequent feedings. That should be, for most of you guys, more than enough to gain maximum muscle. If it's not, then your calories are probably too low. You have other things going on. And again, I don't have a problem with a higher protein diet than that. If that's what you choose to eat and that's what you enjoy, that's fine. And for a lot of chronic overeaters, for us to eat more protein keeps us satiated longer. We'll eat less calories. That's probably a good thing. For the skinny undereater, telling these guys, oh, they need to be eating 200 or 250 grams of protein a day is the best way to keep them skinny. Why? Because high protein suppresses appetite. And if they're eating 3 times as much protein as they need to gain muscle mass and they're not eating enough carbs and other stuff because they're so full that then their training and recovery suffers, they stay skinny and small. Just pointing out that, high protein has its benefits, but really high protein diets for people who struggle with appetite and have too fast of a metabolism to handle their own appetite to gain weight and gain muscle, it's a real bad idea. It's a good way to keep them skinny longer and keep them from gaining muscle. And then they think that they're a hard gainer all of a sudden. Wonder why. Maybe because people are filling them up on protein and then they're not eating enough. So really, guys, overthinking this stuff is really silly. If you're eating 3 or 4 meals of protein every day, you're getting sufficient protein like I described, you shouldn't be worrying any further about the timing of the protein or getting enough when you sleep, as you are getting enough when you sleep. I'm sure your body's got a couple of grams left over from that last meal of protein you had that evening to fuel your muscle growth. I'm sure it can come up with 2 extra grams out of that. Considering if you ate 30 and that's half of what you need just for your basic metabolic functions out of just one of your meals, you'll be just fine, guys. This sort of stuff really only becomes important when you try to do something crazy like, I'm going to gain muscle on 50 grams of protein a day. You start doing stuff like that, timing, quality, and everything of your protein start to become real important real fast. Like, you're going to be a raw vegan who eats 50 grams of protein a day. Okay, I get it. But you've put an external non-balanced diet stipulation on yourself that is requiring you to do more work. For everyone on a balanced diet who's eating enough food, this sort of stuff is really kind of a non-issue. And it's stuff that people argue about and make out to be so important, and it really isn't. Because if you're on a good balanced diet and you're eating enough to fuel your activities and weight gain, and you're not intentionally avoiding protein, this is not a problem. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.